As I mentioned, so we have launched this year's State of Food and Agriculture flagship publication last Friday. And we had a great event with more than 200 participants, including ambassadors of our member state countries, as well as representatives of farmers' organizations or sustainable business partnership organizations, consumer organizations. So we really hope it brings together all the stakeholders that all the panelists have been talking about to be able to achieve the food systems transformation we all know we need. And this year's theme is basically on value-driven transformation of agri-food system. So now I'm going to always say agri-food systems because it is FAO speak. Basically, we mean the food systems that are linked to the agricultural production, agricultural goods and services will be mentioned as well. And this year's report builds on the momentum that the last year's report initiated. And that was a commitment to do 2 back-to-back publications, the first time ever in SOFA's history, which has been published since 1947. We are doing basically 2 reports on the same topic, which is basically the hidden costs of our agri-food systems. Last year's report quantified global agri-food systems hidden costs, and then it established that they were $12.7 trillion with a 95% probability of exceeding, sorry, I'm going to put my timer as I speak. Yes. With a 95% probability of exceeding $10 trillion. And that has raised a lot of interest in both our member state countries, as well as in the research and true cost accounting discourse, to continue doing more on this, try to understand how we can add value to our agri-food systems. Not just talk about the hidden costs. Yes, there are a lot of hidden costs of our agri-food systems in terms of health hidden costs, environmental hidden costs, and social hidden costs. But then, of course, we can turn that into value by the correct investments and by the systems approach that we advocate. So in response, we have refined the estimates of last year's so far, meaning that we have updated all the data sets using FAO stat data, which has more buy-in from government, obviously, because the FAO-stat data has been vetted by governments. So instead of using satellite-based data sources, we're using, to the extent possible, FAO-stat data in this year's report, as well as global burden of disease data that is used to quantify health hidden costs. We updated that as well because a new version came out in May this year. So health hidden costs also have been updated, and social hidden costs, of course, prevalence of undernourishment, as well as poverty information. Everything has been updated for this year. And with all those refinements and updates, we still find high confidence intervals strongly overlap. And this year's report, again, confirms the hidden costs that are about 12 trillion. This year is 11.6 trillion, which is still equivalent to about 10% of global GDP. And what we do in this year's report is sort of looking at the income, country income groups, like other panelists have talked about, lower income countries, upper middle income countries, and the distributions of different types of nutrition, health behaviors in these places. We were thinking about, okay, we do need to link this report to policy entry points. And to be able to link policy entry points directly within the agri-food system, we would like to use not just the country income groups, but a representation of country groupings that represent better the food systems, right? So food consumption environment, urbanization, availability of supermarkets, as well as productivity in agriculture, agricultural value added per worker. And this is a typology that has been published before and validated against many food systems dashboard indicators by Marshall et al. In 2021. What we've done is basically we took that typology and added the protracted crisis categorization, right? Because this is a list released by FAO every year, IPC protracted crisis category, to identify better the specific risks and challenges faced by these countries that face long-term climatic, environmental, social, or political crises. So this is the global distribution of the agri-food systems typology that we have used. Again, with the idea of, okay, if we identify similarities in terms of the agri-food systems, the length of the food value chains, and the urbanization trends, and all different actors and how they relate to each other, we can also use a bit more generalizable policy recommendations. In a global report, you have to do certain things like this. So out of that 12 trillion that I've mentioned, 11.6 to be exact, in this year's report, we also look at the distribution, not just in terms of dollar values, but also in terms of the burden the hidden costs place in the country's economies, right? So here we're looking at the share of GDP of these hidden costs that are quantified for 153, actually 156 countries, but 153 countries are behind this graph because they're in the agri-food systems typology. And we're looking at the average share to GDP of these hidden costs and how they distribute between health, social, and environmental hidden costs. And as you see here, the protracted crisis category is the category that's facing the largest burden in terms of the hidden costs, 47% of their GDP. Basically, their hidden costs are equivalent to 47% of the GDP in these settings. And for traditional agri-food systems, it's still very sizable at 22%. And these two categories, the hidden costs are largely driven by social hidden costs. And in protracted crisis countries, as you see, environmental hidden costs are also very sizable, actually the largest category of all agri-food systems types, hinting to the vicious cycle between environmental hidden costs and environmental stressors and prolonged conflict. So when you look at the burden, basically this helps us understand, okay, so when we document these types of hidden costs, right? Countries in industrial agri-food systems, it's just 6% of their GDP. And if they wanted to take those actions to deal with the challenges of hidden costs and addressing them, they would have the resources to do so. But if your country, the hidden costs are more than 20% of your GDP, it would be very challenging to address for those countries just by themselves. And especially given that we are highly interconnected, globalized agri-food systems, these disparities that we document basically give food for thought in terms of the international collaboration that is needed also to address this globally, right? So let's take, again, actually just briefly going back here, something I'd like to note is, of course, the health hidden costs. And then that's why I think this webinar and our esteemed panelists' speeches are very critical in noting here as well. Health hidden costs are significant everywhere, not just in industrial countries, these are shares, but dollar values is even huger, right? But also in traditional and protracted crisis countries. So we do have to do something about the health hidden costs. And that was one of the most surprising things that came from last year so far. And this year, what we did was, okay, let's try to unpack this because we need to identify policy entry points, like the panelists mentioned, school feeding programs, changing food environments, taxes, subsidies, all kinds of policy entry points, right? So, but we need to understand what drives these health hidden costs in this setting to be able to link to policy entry points. So what we did was basically using the global burden of disease data. That's how the health hidden costs are quantified, right? Productivity losses due to non-communicable diseases that are from dietary risks. So here you see 13 dietary risks that we have quantified globally for all those 156 countries. And when we look at the global totals of hidden costs, this health hidden costs, which is basically 8 trillion, right? It makes 70% of the total. You see the diets low in whole grains and diets low in fruits, as well as diets high in sodium, drive more than 50% of global health hidden costs, which is more than $4 trillion annually, right? These are all annual numbers quantified using 2020 purchasing power parity dollars. But again, of course, this is the global picture. And as you see, red meat, processed meat is not on the top 3 risks, dietary risks that drive these hidden costs. But of course, the distributional issues I mentioned are very significant here as well. So here we just show only 2 of the extreme categories to demonstrate the distributional issues. When you look at the countries in protracted crises, the top 3 dietary risks driving the health hidden costs are not enough consumption of fruits and vegetables and whole grains. But in the industrial countries, all of which are high-income countries, by the way, we document the correlations also in the so far. You see processed meat is on basically top second hidden cost driver. Red meat isn't. Red meat is the fourth, actually. But top three includes processed meat. That's the important difference, right? Whole grains and fruits almost everywhere, like on top three. But in industrial countries, you see the processed meat consumption driving the third biggest driver, second biggest driver actually of the health hidden costs. And the trends across different agri-food systems is also very interesting because most of the dietary risks when countries change from protracted crisis to traditional, maybe non-diversifying and industrial systems during their transitions, most dietary risks kind of increase a bit and then decrease, a bit of a Kuznets curve relationship. But in processed meat is an exception. There's a linear increase in processed meat and the non-communicable diseases related to too much processed meat consumption over these agri-food systems categories. So we document these in many different ways. Of course, always trying to come up with policy entry points, right? But before we get into that, of course, distributional challenges, we have to think about, okay, we can think about a lot of local level policies, like school feeding programs we just heard about as well. But this is the United Nations, and we're trying to provide a global picture of the status of the challenges we're facing, right? So distributional challenges are actually in the forefront of this discussion from our point of view, especially. So when you look at the distributional challenges in this context, we see that hidden costs affect different actors disproportionately, of course. Primary producers often bear the burden of taking action. It might be, managing the soil better or irrigation better or aquaculture production facilities, but they're not really benefiting from let's see. Okay, so they're creating the hidden costs, but if they take action, they're not going to be able to reap the benefits of internalizing that externality, right? So that the protests that we've seen actually in most of Europe also was an important thing here to think about. We had a special box about that, trying to understand, okay, what is it that the primary producers in the whole agri-food system can do, but how can that be addressed in a more fairly distributed way across the food system? And then there's the challenges of spatial and temporal disparities, of course, right? When you look at the hidden costs and the way we've quantified it, sometimes, a cost producer like greenhouse gas emissions, it's a global externality, obviously, right? And the challenges are also global, but the production of that hidden costs is local. So there's that spatial divide, as well as the temporal divide, the time divide, right? In terms of the non-communicable diseases, especially. So if the current generations are having unhealthy diets, it takes a lot of time to, even suffer the consequences. So you might not be able to link, okay, what you've done today is going to lead to some sort of non-communicable disease in 20 years, 30 years from now, and that's going to cost the whole economy and society in general in terms of lost productivity as well as other health-related hidden costs. And then, of course, there's asymmetric power relations that hinder the fair distribution of costs and benefits. When the producer organizations, or even consumer representatives don't have enough power to shape food environments, it becomes very challenging to address these challenges, especially at the global level. So we try to document those as well, and then try to touch upon the regulatory, financial, and market structures that might favor the status quo. And basically, it's very challenging to change the status quo, right? And what we did in this year's so far was also to work through these challenges through case studies and try to document how true cost accounting as an approach can help us understand all these challenges and shape policy at different levels. And one of the case studies that we feature is actually funded by the Swiss Federal Office for Agriculture, and they wanted to conduct a nationally tailored nationwide true cost accounting using the FAO data and approach, but updating it using the national relevant thresholds or national relevant data, additional components. So that's one of the important case studies that we feature in this year's report, because basically it shows how important the stakeholder consultations are in terms of leading national level change, right? A whole nation's vision for 2050 is now using a true cost accounting approach, trying to identify policies to change nutrition behaviors, food environments, production externalities, and social inequalities. And other case studies also include the 6 countries that you see there, where we've looked at different scenarios, future scenarios, quantified scenarios, to understand what are the actions, like concrete actions that these countries can take that would decrease the hidden cost over entire agri-food systems in the most significant way. So what can be done? Again, of course, I'll be a bit abstract compared to other presenters, given the nature of the global report that we're talking about here. But in the report, we have tried to synthesize most of that literature that our other panelists have mentioned, and try to basically come up with actions that we have seen enough evidence in terms of their effectiveness and efficiency in achieving the reductions in hidden costs, not just health, but also environmental and social hidden costs. In terms of the agri-food value chain actors, I have 2 minutes left. In terms of agri-food systems actors, we talk about the effectiveness of coordinated action, especially with the view and understanding that, when especially small-scale producers in traditional agri-food systems, when they don't have enough power to set prices, negotiate, and to be able to change their behavior, early action, maybe to produce in more environmental friendly ways and find better marketing and value addition strategies that are both environmentally friendly as well as socially and health-wise more beneficial. We look at a lot of literature in terms of the environmental, social, and governance from the private agri-food businesses point of view and the voluntary standards, and then document very successful cases, some of which actually have used even true cost accounting in their value chains to be able to set the prices that you see in the supermarket in a way that incorporates the hidden costs, basically true price initiatives, right? Labeling certification is part of these type of initiatives as well. And of course, always compliance with laws and regulations. And we will get to some examples here in terms of institutions as well. So one interesting thing I think in this report was also the harnessing of the purchasing power, right? We all talked about, we go to the supermarket and what do we do with our food dollar? Of course, as consumers, we are the largest stakeholder of the agri-food system, right? Each and every one of us is a stakeholder from that point of view. So we discuss a lot of that literature in terms of behavioral change and nudging and systematic reviews, and try to highlight the importance of harnessing the purchasing power, not just of individuals, but also institutions, schools, hospitals, and similar institutions. And for example, in New York State, I thought Melissa was going to mention it, they're also using true cost accounting in the New York City, actually, in terms of their New York City procurement programs, is being guided more and more using true cost accounting. And finally, last but not least, policy, investment, and civil society research groups like ourselves here, how they could use this type of approach. True cost accounting is a very powerful tool to incorporate the hidden costs of our actions and agri-food systems especially. And the need to establish better public and private financing, especially also when it comes to international collaboration and cooperation, as you've seen the divides between the industrial, traditional, and protracted crisis settings. And of course, repurposing agricultural support is a big ticket item there as well. We have a long discussion about that and a synthesis of existing evidence. And FAO does a lot of social protection programs, and increasingly there are also nutrition-sensitive social protection programs. And all of that is, of course, powered through R&D towards sustainable consumption and production. So I'm gonna leave it here, and if you guys go to the web page at the end of the slide here, there's also a very nice interactive story where you can look at the whole world and then compare the health hidden costs of these different dietary risks in terms of both dollars as well as the disability adjusted life years, and learn much more about this year's publication. Thank you.